Welcome to Tech Talk with Breaking Light Productions. Today's talk will be about costumes as armor. We love to use the costuming choices in the Mrs. Hawking shows, not just to tell you something about the characters' lives, but also to send messages about where they are in the course of the story. One way we use them is as the characters' emotional or mental armor, as in whether they're ready for battle, whether they're letting down their defenses, or whether there's a difference in power between them. Take Mrs. Hawking, for example. It's very rare that our hero is ever seen without her gloves, whether in civilian clothes or in her stealth suit. It makes sense because the standards of ladies' dress and the rough conditions of her work, but they also say something about her relationships with the people around her. The way she so rarely touches anyone with her bare hands is an indicator of how closed off she is emotionally and how much she feels the need to protect herself from unguarded connections with others. In Part 3, Bass Instruments, when Nathaniel returns home late in Scene 2.3, he's still wearing his full tuxedo, while he finds Clara there waiting for him in her nightdress.
Couldn't I count on that, Nathaniel? That you and I could trust one another?
But when they get honest and raw with each other about all the things he's been keeping from her, his jacket comes off and his tie comes loose. And this mutual state of undress indicates their dropping of pretense with each other. It works similarly in 2.3 of Gentlemen Never Tell, when Justin and Cassius finally stop sniping at each other and get honest about what their history means to one another.
Oh, Cassius. Whatever am I supposed to do with you?
By contrast, Mrs. Hawking in her supersuit confronting Miss Zakharova in her nightclothes emphasizes the power differential between them, that Miss Zakharova has no defenses against our hero's demanding of the truth. There are many instances in Part 5, Mrs. Frost. By this point, both Mrs. Hawking and Mary spend a great deal of time together in vests because of their growing need to protect their hearts from each other. Our title villain herself appears in a series of grander and grander ensembles as she gets more and more overtly threatening.
Well, Mr. Hawking, I'm afraid I have come to the end of my patience.
There's also the threat of Clara's Astrakhan, which is important enough to warrant its own subplot.
Unless someone has that new Astrakhan I've been eyeing for my birthday hidden away somewhere?
A birthday gift from her beloved husband Nathaniel. When Clara wears it, it practically becomes armor in a literal sense, giving her the strength to confront the villain who's holding her husband captive. There's also significance to seeing Mrs. Frost remove her own fur in a contrasting white to Clara's black, while Clara is pressing her advantage in their confrontation. We can tell Madame Malaika is an observant Muslim because she wears a hijab, but it also serves as a form of her need to go around armored in a dangerous world. The one scene we see her without it is when she and Mrs. Hawking are reckoning with their difficult and painful history. By the end of the scene, a strong visual contrast is drawn between them, with Madame Malaika fully garbed in the magnificence of her heroism, while Mrs. Hawking is stripped down to her corset. This shows her willingness to defer to Madame Malaika's emotional boundaries. Costume choices never have to mean any one thing, and they rarely only mean one thing. But differences in the level of formality, of coverage, of grandiosity can do a lot to reveal the different statuses of the characters as they go along their scenes. And it's yet another way we can use this very expressive art form to add more meaning to our stories. Can you think of any other time in the Mrs. Hawking series where the clothes serve as armor for the characters? Let us know in the comments below. And you can see the full Mrs. Hawking series here on our YouTube channel at Mrs. Hawking.